Hello, it's me, Kyle. Welcome to Give Pause Hobby, the channel where I stop to appreciate the things I love to fill my free time with. And today we are finishing up a three-part kind of series that will, from this point forward, be an annual thing. And I'm, of course, talking about my Hall of Fame, my Give Pause Hobby Hall of Fame. So up here in the corners, you'll see the first one, which was the pre-2012 years up through 2017. The reason I chose those is 2012 was when I really officially planted my flag as a hobby board gamer, and that was with Lords of Waterdeep. But before that, I was playing Magic the Gathering was the big game that I was playing before that, as well as many others, but nothing like life-changing or huge, Lords of Waterdeep or many other games since then have become. The reason up through 2017 is because 2018, part 2, up here in the corners, takes us 2018 up through 2021. And the reason for that is those are the years that I have on BG Stats. So 2018, 19, 20, and 21. We have, is that right? 28? Sorry, quick math. I counted on my fingers and I didn't believe my own fingers. So yeah, I have, I'm working on my 5th year so far of tracking everything on BG Stats. And that's not just games, but also, DBMP, which is my abbreviation for design, build, model, paint. So obviously painting minis, building anything to include box inserts, but also if I'm working on a prototype, if I'm working on a solo mode for a game that I love, or a spoiler character, working on a player aid to put along with my box, that's all in the umbrella of DBMP. Then I also have Light, Board Games Light, which are playing with games that we own, but not necessarily playing with them by the rules. As I always say on the channel, board games are just boxes of toys with rules, and Board Games Light is more focusing on that toys aspect. Growing up, my brother and I, my mom was selling toys through Discovery Toys, and some of those were board games. And a lot of them were games way above our pay grade at our ages. And we didn't bother to actually learn the rules, but we played with the pieces nonetheless. And I love doing that with my children, who are currently 6 and 3. And so those are included in there, but also under, again, the DBMP umbrella is wide. Also things like building my kids' swing set or our paver patio. Those things are all in BG Stats just for that side of things, because I'm a stats nerd and I just like to compare how things match up. All right, so that was part 1 and 2. So pre-2012 through 2017, 2018 through 2021. Part 3 is going to be in roughly the format that all future videos for the Hall of Fame will be, where I'm choosing 2 games from the previous year that made an impact. And what I mean by made an impact, I do not mean, well, let's say what I don't mean first. First of all, I don't mean it necessarily is a game that was released that year. I just oftentimes, the best of intentions and, purchases and shipments made, I have games that are brand new, and sometimes I just don't get them to the table until a little bit down the line. So I'm not someone who can really definitively say this was the best game that year. I could say the best game I played, but I'm gonna instead not have little subcategories. I don't care what year it came out. I also am not interested in saying the 2 games that I first played this recent year, because it could be a game that I've always loved, but for some reason that year was the year that some big event happened, or a new expansion came out and I, re-stoked my love for the game, or just for whatever reason, it clicked more that year than any others. So it doesn't have to be released that year. Doesn't need to be a new to me game that year. Doesn't even need to be a game that ranked among other games, the game I played the most of. It's just a game that made significant impact. So let's get into it. This is 2022. And I'm going to start with one that is not necessarily, strictly speaking, in the board game space, and that is Warcry. by Games Workshop. So this is a, for those who are not aware, it's a tabletop skirmish game, which means there are between, depending on who you're playing, 5 to 15 models that you're fielding on a, I think it's like 2.5 by 3.5 feet like board or table, and then you're putting some terrain on there and you're going at it. You're rolling dice, you're using abilities, moving models around, trying to take objectives, kill each other, all that sort of stuff. It's made by GW, so there's a tremendous amount of just ridiculous quality sculpts of minis to build and paint and just, enjoy having. But the game itself is, I say it's not strictly speaking a board game, but honestly, it's closer to a board game than lots of other skirmish games by some of the mechanics that it uses. One of the biggest ones, one of the coolest ones that stuck out when I was first introduced to the game was when you find initiative, or when you roll for initiative each round. You're rolling 6 dice, and what you're looking for are the most number of unmatched dice. So if you roll 6 dice and you get 1 through 6, congrats, you have 6 solo dice, which means you almost undoubtedly will win initiative, because that's a pretty unlikely roll. So if someone rolled 1, 2, 3 and then 3 4s, their initiative would be 3. But since you rolled all singles, your initiative is 6. Which that in and of itself, that's not like the craziest thing in the world, but it's what comes next that makes it really interesting. Because not only do you have wild dice that in priority order you need to determine if you're going to use any. So I might roll 1 through 6, but then I have 2 wild dice and I'm going to make one of them into a 6 and then one of them into a 5. So now I have 2 pairs of 6s and 2 pairs of 5s, a pair of 6s and a pair of 5s, and then I have an initiative of 4, the remaining numbers. Now, the challenge in that, or the reason why that's interesting, is because the flip side of initiative is obviously good. You get to go first. You get to maybe kill a model that otherwise could do damage to you. That's just more bang for your buck. Obviously good. But the benefit of having matched dice is the abilities on your specific models, but also the general abilities that anybody can use, are based off of spending pairs, doubles, triples, and quadruple dice matchings. And so if you roll a bunch of singles, you're almost undoubtedly going to go first, but that round you're not going to be able to use some of your cool abilities. Sometimes doubles are just re-roll a die or get to do an extra thing. But quads, having 4 of something, or sometimes get to move and attack again with the same model, which in a tabletop skirmish game where you might only have 8 models, and you only get to really use a couple actions each model a turn, that's huge to be able your biggest model to say do something twice. But anyways, I'm getting way ahead of my immediately into the weeds. I'm doing the opposite of the SWATA, where usually I introduce the cool things and then the cool ideas. That's one of the coolest ideas, because again, it puts tension in what are you going to use that wild dice for. Sometimes, if you have a triple, but that you want that quadruple effect, it's easy. You're well, I'm going to spend a wild die to turn that triple into a quad. Great. But other times, honestly, initiative is more important than any ability. And so you might use wilds as added singles to go up to, a higher initiative value. And again, it's all, both players get to do this. It's very tense of who's going to do what. But then when you get to playing, it's all I grew up in middle and high school playing so much Warhammer 40K, which is their, far-flung future tabletop, not skirmish, full-on armies. And as much as I love board games, there is very little that kind of goes toe to toe with the experience of having models you took a bunch of time to paint, having terrain that you and your opponent built, taking time, putting it all on the table, and seeing what happens. Win, lose, or otherwise. Just like getting to see this thing take place that looks extra cool because you and your opponent actually made it look that cool. And Warcry is completely the same way. I have, I think, 8 different war bands in various degrees of paintedness. I've played it a number of times, like a kind of a surprising amount of times, with like other people outside of like the one major game group that got me into it. I also taught it to my wife, who loved it. It's just a little bit tricky to table, like timing wise. So it's not something currently we can do a ton of. But she had a blast, and she won. But she had a blast first before she won. But really, like the game itself is good enough to, I think to include. But what solidified the fact that it's on this list is that it really, and something I'm going to get to at the end, spoiler, there's going to be runner-ups. The runner-up for this slot got me back into painting models again, and that's just a really cool thing that I have loved every minute of. And again, that's all been tracked in not only my board game stats app, but I also have a spreadsheet I'm probably showing you right now of when I did work on things and when I finished them. And you'll notice a couple things. 1, I have not finished many of the projects I've started on this, and 2, I have not done a ton of this lately, but I am painting things again for other games, and falling in love with the hobby. So hopefully that'll get Warcry back up and running. But yeah, Warcry, number 1 for 2022. Number 2, the second one for 2022 is going to be Tapestry by Stonemaier Games. And now, before I get anything else, what you need to know about me is way back, even in middle and high school, Kyle, well before I would label myself as a board gamer at all. The board games were something that sometimes people had and played, but it wasn't something that you defined your kind of character or hobby around. I was doing a lot of video game on different consoles, but my parents were not super thrilled with video games in general, and we eventually they allowed them to be in our house as opposed to me just seeking them out maniacally from other places. But it was always 1 or 2 generations behind, and so I was never as anyone to get something on the cutting edge. We got our Nintendo 64 well after. Actually, Game Boy. Game Boy was one that we did get when the hype for Tetris was real. And that was a family gift. But then our N64 was late. Our Dreamcast, we got that when months away from them stopping production on Dreamcast. I got my Xbox later than usual. I got my 360 a year and a half afterwards. That was pretty close. I got my PS2 years after I got the PS2 Slim. Xbox One years after. Nintendo Switch years after. So this is a well-stated. I have not gotten a single console at launch ever. And I gotten some games at launch, many games, but never a console. And one thing that has kind of stuck with me with that is there is benefit to be had in being later to something. First of all, you get to see more honest and more variety of reviews of things. You get to, especially for video game side, you get to allow them to work through the kinks, work the bugs out that maybe were there for launch and in later on versions weren't there. That's the same thing for board games, believe it or not, with errata and all that, just not as prevalent as video games. But, and then also price, obviously, that's a nice thing too. So when I came to Tapestry, I had sold a number of games to Board Game Co. and got some store credit. Tapestry was something that was always kind of on my radar, but never high enough. And also the price of it was just high enough that it just was a little bit off on the horizon for quite some time. And so turned old games into that and a couple other things, and for a pretty decent price. And lo and behold, it's amazing. I know, again, the benefit of hindsight, I've been able to kind of follow the pathway of Tapestry over the years, and the initial hype, people kind of being a little bit down on the price because a lot of it was in like the miniature buildings, people saying like, oh, it's not enough of the 4X sort of thing. Other people say it's just been a lot of feedback and ups and downs. But there are enough people that I knew and trusted that still loved the game, stuck with it, got, the expansions, and still place it as a game that they enjoy enough to keep in their collection and play. And so, lo and behold, we get it. And it's so much fun. It's so delightful. And I think, again, like Warcry, the thing that just solidified its place on the Hall of Fame was the fact that it really rung in modeling again for me. The thing that solidified the place for Tapestry is that for the different game groups I play with, there is a pretty prevalent distaste for games that have lots of imagery, like a symbolism in their actions or whatever, which on one hand I totally understand, because sometimes it gets to be so prevalent, you're like, you might as well just write it out at this point, as opposed to whatever this like series of hieroglyphics is meant to represent. On the other hand, I recognize like there's a reason why in Magic cards they have keywords instead of always saying, this creature does not tap when attacking, or like vigilance. It's because it saves time. And once you get up and running in the program and the system, whatever it is, then it's all ups from there. You're just like, oh yeah, boom, vigilance. Oh yeah, boom, that symbol. And that, when I opened up Tapestry, I just saw like the player aid, and it had all the different symbols on all 4 of the tracks, and I was just like, oh no. Like there were some things that were universal, picture of the different resource buildings, or your little like pillars for the military conquest, and you saw those a number of times. But many of the symbols were just one and dones. They're just like the one that you get to repeat a power that you already have a thing on. It's only used once. And that said, again, the same devil's advocate in my mind is like, well, guys, just imagine how awful this board would look if there were rules for all those on all the. First of all, some of them wouldn't fit. And second of all, even if they could fit, gross, just no. And so again, the reason why this is on the Hall of Fame is because this is not somehow, paradoxically, not only one of the instances where my like anxiety for how many symbols there were like the highest, but also it's the one where it made the least impact on people. They were just like, okay. And I think it's the fact that it's boiled down to, on your turn, you're only looking at those, 4 options on the 4 different tracks. And really, once you get up and running, you're probably primarily focusing on, 1 to 3 of them. You're usually not honestly looking at all 4. Not saying it never happens, but like that limits exactly what you're doing. And sure, you want to, at least for higher level play, know what's further down the road in the technology track you're doing, not just looking at what's coming immediately next. But for whatever reason, like I got the typical like eyes starting to glaze over during the teach. I'm hearing myself say the things like it's going to make sense when this like happens a few times. We'll learn as we play, blah blah, and then we played, and then we actually did. And I just cold taught it to 2 other people the first weekend I had it, and they had an absolute blast. I did not win. I taught it to my wife, who was absolutely blown away by the game, and we have gone back and forth. I think I'm 1 game ahead in 9 games we've played. And so it's so interesting, the interplay between your civilization with your little grid for your city. But like going down those different tracks, sure, there are like kind of build orders that you might think you're always going to want to do. But at least in my limited experience with the game, because I'm not naive enough to think like I know everything about the game, because I don't. But there are some times, sure, when you're like, oh yeah, that thing worked last time, I'm going to try it again this time. But sometimes based on where you're at on the board, based on what civilization you're playing, how many players you're up against, whatever it may be, there's reasons why something might have worked last time and you don't think it's going to work this time. Or you're trying it and you have evidence that it's not working. But the different civilizations, you can really lean heavy into that. You can lean heavy into going down one or two technology tracks. You can try to play the board and go all across all four of the technology tracks. You can race to get the different buildings, like the monuments. It's just, there's so many different things you can, like levers you can manipulate in the game that, and there's so much variety. And we have the base game, and pretty quickly after we picked up the base game, I got, I can't remember. It's not arts and architecture. We don't have that one yet. It's the other one, plans and ploys, which was the smaller of the expansions. That's just kind of like a more stuff expansion, which is great because there's no downside to that. And also in the rule book for that was the first time they had like some errata on some of the base game, tuning the base game factions either up or down after some playtesting, which I gotta say, like, as much as some people are just like, why aren't the rules, reflective of all the different things? Like, if the game's broken in some ways, you should just like fix it. First of all, that's exactly what an errata is. I do not understand the mindset that people both want a game to be balanced, but also balk at balancing. It makes no sense to me. Secondly, companies, and I'm sure these are not the only ones, but companies like Stonemaier Games and Leader Games that will take an existing IP, an existing game system that is out in the world and nowhere near as connected as like on Steam or through Xbox Live or something, we're gonna say, you know what, like, I know people are used to these systems, but this laundry list of things is wrong, so we're gonna push out a patch and it's gonna fix it for people. There's no pushing out a patch for board games, even if you make it free. Like Leader Games had an adjustment to the Erie, to their or the mechanical electric Erie, because otherwise they were borked and they would just like death loop themselves into eternity. They made it free. You could download it and you could tape it on your board. For a while you could get free stickers that they would send out, and then so there are, as low a barrier of entry as you can make is still a barrier to entry. People don't know it exists but don't have the means or interest to print it out, or just any along that path, things can just not work out. And also they know that there's a mindset of people being like, broken game is broken. Like, right, but we're trying to make it better, trying to improve it. And that's exactly what they did with Tapestry. They said, these factions, with all the games that people have logged, through the various ways we've collected that, we're going to tweak them just a little bit to make them a little bit better, a little bit not so good. I think that's commendable, and I think Tapestry is wonderful. We will definitely at some point get arts and architecture. I believe there's a neoprene mat out there for it, which I think would definitely also be in our future. We did get like fancier bits for like the victory point tracker and discs as opposed to just cubes for everything, which boom, made the game just so much nicer to manipulate and to play. But yeah, Tapestry absolutely crushed it. I'm not breaking new ground here. It's an older game, but it's new to us and we love it. So I know It's not necessarily going to be a lot shorter than the other ones because I'm just talking longer about these games. But in preparing for it, I realized that I don't have the flexibility of looking at like a series of years and saying like, oh, I'm not going to put in this year, but maybe I'll put it next year. Which I know going into the last two videos was a little bit like wibbly wobbly. Like that's not really how those things should go. But that's how I did it because I'm making up my own rules because it's my own channel. But going into a year where all you're doing is 2 from the previous year, you are keenly aware that there are other games that are like at least close to deserving of that praise, but it's not quite there. And the future is not super clear on what games are going to make it in you know, whenever I stamp the next video. So I'm going to 2 videos a year, and for each of those slots, I'm going to have a runner-up. So there's 2 runner-ups as well. So I'm going to try to go a little bit faster on these ones. For Warcry, it's Kill Team. Stop. Hang on. Editing Kyle got in touch with me and let me know past Kyle may have gone a little bit off the rails because this is a type of video I'm not making all the time. And furthermore, this is the first time that I'm doing the 2 choices, 2 runner-ups, like dichotomy. I think I got a little bit too wrapped around the axles about that those 2 could like overlap in some way. I said in my video that you're not seeing right now, I said that my runner-up for Warcry's spot was Kill Team. I just can't live with that. As much as Kill Team was supposed to be my grand re-entry into the tabletop wargaming like GW space, it wasn't. I haven't played it nearly as much as I played Warcry, and even though it had the best of intentions and it kicked off the modeling thing that Warcry, you know, picked up and ran with, just because those 2 things are related does not mean that Kill Team gets an automatic runner-up. That's not how runner-ups work. Because even though, again, I sort of had like, for this slot, this game almost beat it in my mind, that's not really it. It's just the 2 games that made the biggest impact on me that didn't oust the other 2 games that made an even bigger impact on me. So with that, I figured, you know, I have all my future to question whether or not these were the right choices for 2022. I can't already be questioning that before the video is even fully edited. So with that, the first runner-up for this year is not Kill Team. It is Cartographers. And this is another special case because, I don't know, maybe the reason it didn't like crop up on my mental radar was because it's not on the tabletop. Well, it is, but I wasn't playing it on the tabletop. I played more than any other game on my list for 2022. I played Cartographers on the app, and it was, for a while, I was just mainlining, just going game after game after game, and you know, it's just me trying to beat my score. And usually games that are just beat your score just sort of bounce right off me. And up until this year, I'd never played Cartographers. I'd heard great things about it. It's obviously been quite popular, had quite a few expansions, and I love like the roll and write type of structure. When a game, I like to have a little bit of theme at least, and I really like the concept of, you know, what roll and writes are all about, or flip and writes, or whatever's, where everybody has a collective or a equal like painter's palette to do with what they will. And then at the beginning you might be like pretty similar, but based on like turn after turn after turn after turn's choices, you look at someone else's game state and you're like, how on earth was that the choice you made for that turn? And you look over at them and you're like, oh, because you're playing a completely different game than I am. And again, I haven't played this multiplayer. I haven't played it in the physical space. I've just been using the app. And I did get into some of the expansion stuff at the end. They did release it for the app, and I started my work with that. But it's so good. It's really so good. And I gotta say, like, as much fun as it would be just to like, color things in real life, the app makes it so just like immediate. The game goes so quick. But the reason, when I was reflecting on this, when I realized my dire error in the video and fixed it before it was too late, I was thinking about like what is going to be, because there are a couple. As soon as I took Kill Team off the list, there were actually a couple that were vying for this spot, and I won't make subcategories of runner-ups. I'm just going to leave it at that. But one of the things that was in the corner, like rooting for Cartographers, was the fact that if a game gets to a point where I want to keep track on my BG Stats app, I want to keep track of all the different like variables, like, you know, I got whatever score this game. Great. But I'm interested, I'm invested enough to want to know what were the variables. And for me, the scoring elements that you have in Cartographers, the fact that you are only getting points from the like certain of the randomly drawn and assigned scoring cards, and only at certain times in the game, so that there were some scoring elements like, yeah, this one is great when you have the whole game to develop it. Other times it might be the first scoring phase that you have, like the first two, and you're like, I might be able to access this in one way. I've kept track of every, like, where those were. Now I didn't keep track of like what phase of the game they were scoring, because even for me, that would be too much. But you know, there are some that are just higher scoring than others, or I have scored higher on them than others. Yeah, it's fantastic, and I've been away from it for a while, which also might have led to the fact that, like, even when you're looking at a whole year, there's a little bit of that proximity bias. Like, if I was really playing something really great recently, that might just like be a little closer to the top of my mind than something really great that I was playing further back. And I think this falls into that too. But even still, I like talking about it now makes me want to play it again. And I don't for a minute think that there's not a chance of me ever picking this up physically, because then I can just share it with other people. Because again, only played solo, and even as a solo, like, you know, board game lover, I think this one would actually be pretty darn fun. So anyways, that's my first runner-up. Longer discussion about it than I anticipated for runner-ups, but that's only because, Pascal, you messed up. That Kill Team wasn't it. It's Cartographers. All right, back to further in the Pascal. Then the other, for the Tapestry slot, I have to say Wonderland's War. Again, not a new game that I heard a lot of great things about, but for whatever reason I was just like, meh, I don't know. And the price tag is a little bit higher. That probably was part of it. Me just like, you know, self-soothing, being like, maybe the game's not everything that people just spend money on it, so they're overhyping it, or sure, it might be a great game, but like at what cost? Well, I found a better deal for it, and after so long of hearing so much great things about it. And I've played it at 2 players. I've played it at 3 players, where there are actually 2 players for each army, which was long but super fun actually. And I played it at 3 actual players, and it's just so friggin' fun. The putting like the tea party, getting your chips and throwing them in your bag. Like, honestly, the tea party is like in some ways even more fun to me as someone who just likes the deck building or like bag building aspect of things than the battles. But the battles are so fun. So that's just showing like the intensity of fun of the tea party. And yeah, suffice to say, I love the game enough that not only did I back like the little expansion on Kickstarter, but I did eventually convince myself even though I have the little coin like counter or like the holders for the chips, I did get the fancier poker chips. I think it will make setup and just like maintenance of the game easier, but also going to just like feel that much cooler. But Wonderland's War, I just didn't get a chance to play it that much, and haven't played it nearly as much as of this year as I'd like. So who knows? The game, this one, Kill Team, unless something big happens, I don't think that one's coming back in the future. Not Kill Team, Cartographers. But Wonderland's War for sure could be one that makes its appearance on the Hall of Fame at a later date. We'll just have to see. But that's where we're going to wrap. Again, a little bit longer for each game. Still shorter overall than those other 2 episodes. But, you know, what do I say? It's a hobby that engenders, like me gushing my love for these games. And if I'm not going to do it anywhere else, a Hall of Fame video is probably the best time to do it. So if you've made it to this point in the video, sound off down below. What was your 1 or 2 games, not necessarily like were new or even new to you, or even game you played the most of? What made the biggest impact on you in 2022? Now, you would also say like, it is July. No, it's not July, it's August. Like my brother in board games, you missed this by half a year. True, because I didn't come up with the format until well into 2023. So in the future, this will probably be closer to the new year. But for now, I'm ringing out 2022 in August of 2023. Because again, like I said, I am nothing if not a late adopter. So I'm late adopting the changeover of the calendar. So with that, thanks for taking a pause with Give Pause. Happy gaming, and we'll see you next time.